"May I have your leftovers, sir?" But when the black millionaire looked into her eyes, a miracle happened. "You can't possibly mean to feed your child that?" A voice, sharp as shattered glass, cut through the quiet hum of the upscale diner. The biting cold of the late November evening seemed to seep through the very walls of the cheap, rented room, its chill a constant companion to Alara and her small daughter, Lily. A single, flickering light bulb cast long, dancing shadows that made the threadbare furniture look even more gaunt and weary, much like Alara herself felt, deep in her bones. She pulled the thin, worn blanket tighter around Lily's sleeping form, her own stomach clenching with a familiar, hollow ache she had long learned to ignore, for her child's sake, always for her child. Her termination from the bakery, unjust and cruel, had come a month ago, a dismissal based on whispers and lies after she had refused the advances of the manager, and since then, their world had become increasingly fragile. Each day a desperate tightrope walk over a chasm of uncertainty. Eviction loomed, a stark, terrifying word on a piece of paper tucked inside her equally worn purse, a purse that held little more than a few carefully hoarded coins and a faded photograph of a smiling man, Lily's father, taken too soon. She was desperate. The flickering light above her tiny kitchen table seemed to mirror the unsteady beat of Alara's own heart as she counted the meager coins once more, their metallic chill a stark contrast to the warmth she tried to preserve for Lily. The pounding rain outside, a relentless percussion against the rattling windowpane, only amplified the sense of isolation, the feeling that they were utterly alone in a world that had grown cold and indifferent. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that the few coins wouldn't even cover a loaf of bread and a carton of milk, not enough to quiet the rumble in Lily's small tummy when she awoke. The thought was unbearable. Alara's eyes, usually a soft, gentle brown, were haunted now, shadowed with sleepless nights and unshed tears, yet a quiet, dignified resolve still held her upright, a refusal to completely surrender to the despair that gnawed at her. She would find a way. She always had to. She thought of the sleek, gleaming restaurants downtown, places she used to walk past on her way to the bakery, places where people left half-eaten meals without a second thought, meals that could sustain her and Lily for days. The idea, born of pure, unadulterated desperation, began to take root, a shameful yet insistent whisper in the storm of her anxieties. Could she? Could she bring herself to ask? The shame was a raw, physical thing, coiling in her gut, but then the image of Lily's innocent, trusting face, pale with hunger, flashed before her eyes, and the shame recoiled, beaten back by the fierce, unwavering power of a mother's love. Her decision solidified. Later, huddled in her threadbare coat, with Lily's small, cold hand clutched tightly in hers, Alara stood outside the Gilded Spoon, one of the most ornate establishments in the city. Its windows emitting a golden glow that seemed to mock her own shadowed existence. The aroma of rich food, roasted meats, fragrant spices, freshly baked bread, wafted out each time the heavy oak door opened, a cruel taunt to their empty stomachs. Lily, usually so bright and talkative, was quiet, her small face pinched and pale, her eyes wide as she looked at the displays of lavish pastries in the window, her breath fogging the cold glass. Alara's heart thudded, a painful, heavy beat against her ribs. She took a deep, trembling breath, her courage brittle but, for Lily, unbroken. She had to try. Inside, the diner was a cavernous expanse of polished wood and soft amber hue, a hushed murmur of conversation and the clinking of silverware creating a symphony of privilege. Alara guided Lily to a discreet corner near the entrance, her eyes scanning the tables, searching for someone who looked kind. Her gaze fell upon a man sitting alone at a small table near the window. He was impeccably dressed in a crisp, dark suit, his features striking, though a profound sadness seemed to linger in the depths of his dark eyes, a shadow that even the warm lighting couldn't quite dispel. A plate of what looked like steak and roasted vegetables sat before him, largely untouched. He looked lost in thought, his gaze distant as if seeing something far beyond the rain-streaked window. This was Julian Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with staggering wealth and innovation in the tech world, yet here he sat, cloaked in an anonymity born of grief, a grief so deep it had become a sterile silence around his heart. Ever since he lost his beloved wife, Amelia, and their son, Leo, in a car accident 2 years prior. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this desperate woman and her child, would crack the ice that had encased his shattered soul. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Her worn shoes echoed too loudly on the polished floor as she hesitantly approached his table, Lily clinging to her leg. The words felt like stones in her mouth, heavy and jagged. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice barely a whisper, trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. Julian looked up, his gaze clearing slowly, focusing on her pale, weary face, then on the small, shivering child beside her. I was wondering. My daughter and we haven't eaten properly in a while. Her cheeks burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the warmth of the diner. Your leftovers, sir? If you are finished, may I have your leftovers, sir? The question hung in the air, raw and desperate. She clenched her hands, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed somewhere on his chest, unable to meet his eyes fully, bracing for refusal, for scorn. The silence stretched. Julian froze. His mind, usually a whirlwind of code, strategy, and the gnawing ache of memory, went utterly blank for a beat. He saw not a beggar, but a mother, her dignity hanging by a threadbare strand of courage. Her eyes, when she briefly, fleetingly met his, holding a depth of weary resilience that struck him with an unexpected seismic force. He saw the child, small and fragile, her gaze wide and innocent, fixed on the plate of food with an unspoken longing that twisted something deep inside him. Something he thought had died with Amelia and Leo. His own meal, which he'd had no appetite for, suddenly seemed obscene in its untouched abundance. The request, so humble, so desperate, bypassed all his carefully constructed defenses. It was the purest, most raw plea he had heard in years, devoid of artifice, stripped bare by necessity. A profound emotion, alien and yet achingly familiar, stirred within him. It was compassion. Before Julian could formulate a reply, a sharp, cruel voice sliced through the air. You can't possibly mean to feed your child that, a woman at a nearby table, dripping in jewels and disdain, hissed, her voice loud enough to turn heads. This is an establishment for paying customers, not vagrants. Someone call security. Elara winced as if struck, her shoulders slumping, her face paling further. Lily whimpered and buried her face in Elara's coat. The surrounding diners began to stare, some with pity, most with cold curiosity or outright disapproval. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over Elara. She wanted to vanish. But then Julian's voice, calm and commanding, cut through the sudden, charged silence. Actually, he said, his gaze, now clear and unwavering, fixed on Elara, though his words were for the room, she can. And she will. He stood, a tall, powerful presence, his earlier melancholy replaced by a protective fire. He gestured to the stunned waiter. Please, box this up. And bring another full portion of the same, plus 2 large hot chocolates and whatever pastries that little girl would like. He then turned his gaze, now like polished steel, to the woman who had spoken. Madam, compassion is not a currency one pays for. It is given. Perhaps you should try it sometime. The woman flushed a dark, mottled red and stammered, then fell into a spluttering silence. The other diners looked away, suddenly abashed. He turned back to Elara, his expression softening. Please, he said, his voice gentle, sit with me. Both of you. Disbelief warred with a desperate, burgeoning hope in Elara's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with unshed tears. This man, this stranger, hadn't just offered food, he had offered dignity. He hadn't known it then, but Julian Thorne had just taken the first step out of his own long winter. A miracle had indeed begun to unfold, not just for Elara, but for him too. Elara sat, Lily nestled beside her, both sipping the warm, sweet cocoa that seemed to chase away some of the biting cold that had settled deep in their bones. The plate of fresh, hot food Julian had ordered for them arrived, and Elara watched, her heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow, as Lily ate with a quiet, desperate hunger that spoke volumes of their recent hardships. Julian said little, observing them with a steady, almost tender gaze that Elara found herself unable to meet for long. He asked no probing questions, made no demands, simply created a small, safe haven for them in the midst of the storm of their lives. When they were finished and the leftovers from both meals were carefully packed away in gleaming containers, enough food for several days, Julian paid the bill with a crisp note that could have fed them for a month. He scribbled something on the back of a receipt. My name is Julian, he said softly, handing it to her. If you ever need anything, or just someone to talk to. Elara took the small piece of paper, her fingers trembling slightly. Thank you, she whispered, the words wholly inadequate for the profound kindness he had shown. I'm Elara, and this is Lily. Her voice cracked. He simply nodded, a small, almost sad smile touching his lips. Then, they were gone, stepping back out into the relentless, pounding rain. But this time, they carried not just food, but a fragile ember of hope, carefully cupped in Elara's grateful heart. Julian watched them go. The image of Elara's haunted, dignified eyes and Lily's innocent face seared into his mind. The sterile silence of his grief felt, for the first time in 2 long years, a little less absolute. He didn't know it yet, but finding her again, helping her, would become his new, unspoken purpose. The following days were a blur of renewed hardship for Alara. The food from Julian, while a blessed reprieve, couldn't last forever, and the eviction notice still cast a heavy fog of dread over their small apartment. The flickering light seemed to mock her attempts to find work. Every door seemed to close in her face. Every potential employer saw only her worn clothes and the desperation she tried so hard to hide behind a quiet smile. Lily developed a cough, a dry, rasping sound that echoed in the cold rooms and tightened Alara's chest with fear. The small slip of paper with Julian's name and a barely legible phone number felt like a lifeline she was too proud, too ashamed to grasp. What could she say? That his act of kindness wasn't enough to save them? The thought of appearing like a burden, of tarnishing his generous act with further pleas, was unbearable. She tucked the receipt away in her locket, the one that held the picture of her late husband, a sacred, hidden treasure. She would keep fighting. Alone. Meanwhile, Julian Thorne found himself restless, his cavernous mansion suddenly feeling more like a gilded cage than ever before. The memory of Alara's pale, weary face and her selfless concern for her child, even in the depths of her own suffering, had reawakened something within him, a sense of connection, a flicker of the warmth he thought had vanished forever with Amelia and Leo. He instructed his discreet personal assistant, a trusted older woman named Mrs. Peterson, to find Alara and Lily. "Be discreet, Peterson," he'd said, his voice unusually strained. I want to make sure they're all right." Mrs. Peterson, who had known Julian since he was a boy and had mourned alongside him, understood the unspoken depth of his request. It wasn't just charity, it was a lifeline for Julian himself. Within a day, using the diner's security footage and some gentle inquiries, she located Alara's address, painting a grim picture of her circumstances, the recent job loss, the impending eviction, the child's illness. A cold fury mixed with a profound ache settled in Julian's chest. He had the power, the wealth, to change her world, yet she was suffering in silence. The secret intervention began almost immediately. One morning, Alara found a plain envelope slipped under her door. Inside, there was no note, just enough cash to cover 2 months' rent and her overdue utility bills. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Who? How? Could it be Julian? But there was no name, no indication of the sender. The anonymity was both a relief and a puzzle. A few days later, a large box of groceries appeared on her doorstep, filled with fresh fruit, vegetables, warm bread, and even some small toys and coloring books for Lily. Another anonymous delivery brought a supply of children's medicine, the exact kind Lily needed for her worsening cough. Alara felt a seismic shift of emotion, from desperate fear to bewildered gratitude. It was as if a guardian angel was watching over them, mending the tears in their fragile existence with invisible thread. The flickering light in their small apartment seemed a little brighter, the biting cold a little less piercing. Lily's laughter, weak at first but growing stronger, began to echo in the rooms again, a sound more precious than any earthly treasure. Alara clutched the locket containing Julian's receipt. She didn't know for sure, but her heart whispered his name. Julian, through Mrs. Peterson's daily, discreet reports, felt a quiet satisfaction, a warmth spreading through him that was entirely new. He saw Alara taking Lily to the park, her face less haunted, a small, sincere smile gracing her lips. He saw her buying new, warmer clothes for Lily with the money he'd ensured she'd found in an old coat pocket, a small deception Mrs. Peterson had cleverly orchestrated. He wasn't just observing, he was actively, albeit secretly, participating in her fragile recovery. His vast, gleaming office, usually a place of sterile efficiency, now held a soft hush of anticipation as he awaited news of Alara and Lily. He was driven by a renewed purpose, a need to protect this pure, selfless woman who had, with a simple, desperate request, reminded him what it meant to feel. He knew he had to see her again, not as a benefactor from the shadows, but as Julian, the man who had shared a brief, profound moment with her in a diner. He instructed Mrs. Peterson to arrange a chance encounter. The heavy fog that had clung to the city for days finally lifted, revealing a crisp, bright autumn afternoon. Alara, feeling a little more secure, had taken Lily to the small community library, a haven of quiet warmth and stories. Lily, her cough much improved, was happily engrossed in a picture book, her small tongue poking out in concentration. Alara watched her, a tender smile on her face, the lines of worry around her eyes softened. As she reached for a book on a high shelf, another hand reached for it at the same moment. Her fingers brushed against someone else's. "Oh, excuse me," she murmured, turning. Her breath caught. It was Julian. He looked different from how she remembered him in the diner, less formally dressed in a soft wool sweater, the deep sadness in his eyes still present but now mingled with a gentle, almost hesitant warmth. "Elara," he said, his voice a quiet rumble that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Fancy meeting you here." His smile was sincere, if a little shy. "Julian," she breathed, her heart thudding in a way that was both startling and not entirely unpleasant. What a surprise! Was it a surprise? Or was it the universe, or perhaps a more earthly benefactor, weaving their paths together once more? Lily, hearing her mother's voice, looked up. "Mommy, who's that?" she asked, her gaze curious. "This is Mr. Julian, sweetie," Elara said softly. "He was very kind to us." Julian crouched down to Lily's level. "Hello, Lily," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm glad to see you're feeling better." Lily, usually shy with strangers, offered him a small, bright smile. The connection was undeniable, a soft golden glow seeming to envelop the three of them in the quiet, dusty aisle of the library. He didn't know it yet, but this reconnection was the prelude to a far deeper bond, a sharing of souls that would heal them both in ways they couldn't yet imagine. They talked for a while, amidst the soft hush of turning pages and whispered conversations, their words easy, unforced. Julian didn't mention the anonymous gifts, and Elara didn't ask, though the unspoken acknowledgement hung in the air between them, a tender secret. He spoke of his love for books, for quiet places like this, a stark contrast to the image of the powerful CEO she now knew him to be, thanks to a discreet internet search she'd conducted after their first meeting. Her fingers trembling as she read about his immense success and his tragic loss. This knowledge made his earlier kindness in the diner and the suspected anonymous help even more profound. He was a man who had everything and had lost so much. As they prepared to leave, a light drizzle began to fall outside, the sky turning a soft gray. "Allow me," Julian said, producing a large, sturdy umbrella from his bag, a far cry from Elara's own threadbare, broken one she'd once considered offering him. He walked them to the bus stop, shielding them from the rain, the simple gesture feeling like a protective embrace. Before she boarded the bus with Lily, he hesitated, then said, "Elara, I have a small cottage on my estate. It's quiet and no one uses it. Perhaps you and Lily would like to stay there for a while? Until you're back on your feet. No strings attached. Just a safe place." The offer was staggering. Elara stared at him, her eyes glistening. I don't know what to say, Julian," he smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Say you'll think about it." She nodded, a wave of emotion, too complex to name, washing over her. Hope, sharp and sweet, pierced through her. A few days later, Elara and Lily moved into the charming, sun-drenched cottage on Julian Thorne's stately, sprawling estate. It was like stepping into a dream, a warm kitchen filled with the scent of baked bread, a welcome gift from Mrs. Peterson, soft blankets on comfortable beds, and a small garden where Lily could play safely. It was a world away from the flickering light and biting cold of their old room. Julian gave them space, but he would often find reasons to visit, bringing books for Lily, or fresh vegetables from the estate's organic garden, or simply to share a cup of tea with Elara in the quiet evenings. It was during one of these evenings, with Lily asleep in her new room, the only sound the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth and the gentle sigh of the wind outside, that the confession scene unfolded. The amber hue of the firelight cast a warm glow on their faces. Elara, feeling a sense of safety she hadn't known in years, found herself opening up to him, her voice soft but steady. She spoke of her late husband, Michael, a kind, gentle man, a struggling artist who had filled their small life with love and laughter before a sudden illness had cruelly snatched him away. She spoke of her shattered dreams, her struggles as a single mother, the unjust loss of her job, and the gnawing fear that had been her constant companion. Her words were not a plea for pity, but a simple, sincere sharing of her truth, her quiet dignity unwavering even as she recounted her deepest pains. Julian listened, his dark eyes fixed on her, unwavering and filled with a profound empathy that made her feel truly seen, truly heard. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy solutions, he simply listened, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her remembered grief. When she finished, a single tear traced a path down her cheek, glistening in the firelight. He didn't wipe it away, but his gaze was so tender it felt like a caress. He quietly got up and made them both a cup of tea, the simple, domestic act more comforting than any words could have been. Then it was Julian's turn. The words came slowly at first, as if unearthing long-buried shards of pain. He spoke of Amelia, his college sweetheart, his soulmate, her laughter like music, her touch like sunshine. He spoke of Leo, their bright, inquisitive 5-year-old son who had his mother's eyes and his father's curiosity, a boy who loved dinosaurs and bedtime stories. He recounted the day of the accident, the sterile silence of the hospital, the unbearable, crushing weight of a future that had splintered into a million irreparable pieces. His voice, usually so commanding, cracked with raw, unhealed grief. Elara listened, her own sorrow resonating with his, creating an unspoken bond forged in the crucible of shared loss. She saw beyond the billionaire, beyond the powerful CEO, to the man underneath, a man whose heart was as shattered as hers had been. When he fell silent, the only sound in the room was the soft thudding of their hearts beating in a strange, sad harmony. Elara reached out, her fingers gently touching his arm, a simple, spontaneous gesture of comfort. "You're not alone, Julian," she whispered. He looked at her, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a profound connection that transcended words. It was the quiet beginning of healing for both of them. They didn't know it yet, but this shared vulnerability was paving the way for a love as sacred and undeniable as the grief they had both endured. Life at the cottage settled into a gentle rhythm. Lily thrived, her laughter echoing through the small garden, her cheeks rosy with health. Elara, free from the constant, gnawing anxiety of survival, began to rediscover parts of herself she thought had vanished. She baked, filling the cottage with the warm, comforting aroma of bread and pastries, a skill Julian deeply appreciated, often finding excuses to sample her latest creations. He, in turn, introduced her to his world, not the world of gleaming boardrooms and high-stakes deals, but the quiet corners of his estate, the vast library filled with ancient books, the tranquil lake where swans glided gracefully, the hidden observatory where he sometimes sought solace under the stars. They talked for hours, sharing dreams, fears, and quiet observations, their bond deepening with each passing day. A tender, unspoken affection grew between them, as natural and inevitable as the changing seasons. The raw edges of their grief began to soften, smoothed by the balm of companionship and understanding. It was a fragile peace, a golden glow in their lives, but Elara couldn't shake a lingering unease, a feeling that this idyllic interlude was too good to be true. Her past had a way of casting long, cold shadows. The shadow arrived in the form of Mrs. Albright, Elara's former mother-in-law, a woman whose heart seemed to be carved from ice. Agnes Albright had always disapproved of Elara, viewing her as beneath her son, Michael. After Michael's death, her disapproval had curdled into outright bitterness, blaming Elara for not being wealthy enough, for not saving him, for simply existing. Elara had tried to maintain a connection for Lily's sake so her daughter could know her paternal grandmother, but Mrs. Albright's visits were always fraught with tension, her words like tiny, sharp icicles. Unbeknownst to Elara, Mrs. Albright had been making inquiries, her sharp nose for gossip leading her to discover Elara's new, vastly improved circumstances. Jealousy and a cruel possessiveness over her granddaughter fueled her determination to interfere. The antagonist was about to make her move, setting the stage for the climactic salvation scene. The local community center was hosting its annual autumn fair, a cheerful event with games, craft stalls, and a bake-off, something Elara, encouraged by Julian and Lily, had decided to enter. Her lemon drizzle cake, a recipe perfected in the cottage kitchen, sat proudly on the display table. Lily, her face painted like a butterfly, danced around her with excitement. Julian stood a little way off, watching them with a warm, protective smile, his presence a quiet reassurance. He had intentionally kept his connection to Elara low profile in the small town, wanting to shield her from unwanted attention. He hadn't yet publicly declared any formal relationship, wanting Elara to feel secure and independent first. Suddenly, a familiar, grating voice cut through the happy chatter. Well, Elara. Quite the step up for you, isn't it? From begging for scraps to playing lady of the manor, Mrs. Albright stood there, her face a mask of smug contempt, her eyes glittering with malice. Elara froze, the color draining from her face. Her heart thudded. The public humiliation began swiftly and brutally. Mrs. Albright, her voice rising to attract an audience, launched into a tirade. "Look at her, everyone," she announced, gesturing theatrically towards Elara. Living off the charity of some rich man, neglecting her duties as a mother, forgetting her poor, dear Michael so quickly. She sneered at Elara's cake. And now she thinks she's a baker? She couldn't even keep a roof over her own child's head without someone else's money. Each word was a poisoned dart, finding its mark. Elara stood, pale and trembling, but her gaze remained steady, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to Mrs. Albright's shrill performance. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but her voice was drowned out by the older woman's relentless accusations. "She's unfit. She probably trapped this new man, just like she trapped my son." Lily, frightened by the loud, angry voice, burst into tears and ran to Alara, clinging to her legs. Alara wrapped her arms around her daughter, shielding her, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears, feeling the familiar, unbearable weight of shame and injustice. She was visibly overwhelmed, her fragile peace shattered. The crowd murmured, some shocked, some looking at Alara with suspicion. Just as Alara felt her composure begin to splinter, a calm, commanding voice sliced through the tension. "That is quite enough, Mrs. Albright." Julian Thorne stepped forward, moving from the edge of the crowd to stand beside Alara, his arm instinctively going around her shoulder. His entrance was not flamboyant, but the sheer force of his presence, the undeniable aura of power and authority that emanated from him, silenced the crowd instantly. Mrs. Albright, momentarily stunned by this unexpected intervention from a man whose impeccably tailored suit and commanding demeanor spoke of significant influence, faltered. "And who do you think you are?" she snapped, trying to regain control. Julian's gaze, cold as polished steel, met hers. "I am Julian Thorne," he stated, his voice quiet but echoing with an authority that left no room for doubt. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. His name was known, his wealth legendary, even in this small town. "And Alara is under my protection. Every word you have uttered is a malicious falsehood. Born of your own bitterness," his powerful monologue began, each word delivered with precision and conviction. "Alara is the kindest, most selfless, and most resilient woman I have ever had the privilege to know. She is a devoted mother who has endured hardships you cannot even fathom, all with unwavering grace and dignity. She did not trap anyone. If anything, I am the one who has been blessed by her presence in my life and in Lily's life." He looked at Alara then, his expression softening into one of profound tenderness and admiration. "She is a woman of immense virtue and strength. The only unfit person here, Mrs. Albright, is you, with your cruel, baseless accusations and your heart full of venom." Mrs. Albright paled, her mouth opening and closing like a stranded fish. She had expected a cowering, shamed Alara, not this powerful, public defense from one of the wealthiest men in the country. The power dynamic had been utterly reversed. Julian continued, his voice resonating with authority. "As for Alara living off charity," he said, his gaze sweeping over the silent, now awestruck crowd, "Alara will want for nothing ever again. She and Lily are my family now. This cottage she lives in? It is hers. Any support I offer her is given out of love and profound respect, not charity." He then turned his full attention back to the speechless Mrs. Albright. "You will leave now, and you will never harass Alara or Lily again. If you do, you will find that my resources for protecting my family are considerable." The threat, though softly spoken, was unmistakable, carrying the weight of his immense power. Mrs. Albright, thoroughly cowed and humiliated, her face a mixture of fury and fear, turned and practically fled, the crowd parting before her like the Red Sea. Total silence descended for a moment, then someone started to clap, and soon the entire community center was filled with applause. Alara looked up at Julian, her eyes shining with tears, but this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude, relief, and a love that felt as vast and undeniable as the sky. He had not just defended her, he had claimed her, publicly, unequivocally. He smiled down at her, a sacred, tender promise in his eyes. Her salvation was complete. In the aftermath of the dramatic confrontation, a profound peace settled over Alara. The last vestiges of her fear and insecurity vanished, replaced by a deep, unwavering sense of security and belonging. Julian's public declaration had not only silenced her tormentor but had also cemented their bond in a way that felt permanent and sacred. He had not just offered her a house, he had offered her a home, a future, a family. That evening, back in the warmth and safety of the cottage, with Lily sleeping soundly, her painted butterfly wings undisturbed by nightmares, Julian took Alara's hands in his. The firelight danced in their eyes, casting a golden glow around them. "Alara," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "what I said today, I meant every word. You and Lily, you've brought light back into my life, a life I thought would be forever shrouded in darkness. You've shown me how to feel again, how to hope again." His gaze was raw, vulnerable, holding nothing back. "I love you, Alara. More than words can say. I know we've both known profound loss, but perhaps together we can build something new, something beautiful, something lasting." A sob caught in Alara's throat. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of pure, cathartic joy. "Oh, Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I love you too. You saved me in so many ways." He gently wiped her tears with his thumb. "We saved each other," he murmured, before leaning in to kiss her, a kiss that was both a tender promise and a passionate affirmation of their shared future. It was a kiss that sealed their love, a love born from suffering, nurtured by kindness and destined for happiness. All her financial worries were gone. Julian ensured she and Lily would have everything they ever needed. He set up a foundation in Amelia and Leo's name with Alara as a key director, helping other families facing hardship, turning their shared pain into a beacon of hope for others. Their quiet, dignified love story became an inspiration. 1 year later, the sprawling gardens of Julian's stately home were filled with the sound of laughter. Sunlight, a pure golden glow, dappled through the leaves of ancient oak trees, illuminating a scene of idyllic happiness. Alara, her eyes shining with a serene joy, watched as Julian chased a giggling Lily across the perfectly manicured lawn, his own laughter echoing, free and unburdened. The haunted look that had once shadowed Alara's features was completely gone, replaced by a radiant confidence and peace. She was no longer the weary, desperate woman shivering in a threadbare coat. She was cherished, loved, and secure. Their wedding, a small, intimate affair held in the Rose Garden a few months prior, had been a celebration of love resurrected, a testament to the healing power of connection. Lily, now officially Julian's daughter in every way that mattered, thrived under their combined love and care. A bright, joyful child who knew nothing but warmth and security. Mrs. Peterson, a benevolent fairy godmother, often joined them for tea, her heart full watching the happiness that had blossomed from such unlikely beginnings. The memory of loss would always be a part of their story, a tender ache that underscored the preciousness of their present joy, but it no longer defined them. They had built a new life, a new family, on the foundations of shared sorrow and profound, unwavering love. Julian would often catch Alara's eye across a crowded room or in the quiet intimacy of their home, and a silent, sacred understanding would pass between them, a recognition of the miracle that had brought them together. A miracle sparked by a desperate plea for leftovers and a heart that dared to reopen. Theirs was a love story for the ages, a testament to the enduring power of kindness in a sometimes harsh world. This story, dear friends, is a fable for our times, a reminder that even in the deepest despair, a single act of selfless kindness can ignite a spark of hope, a spark that can grow into a cleansing fire of redemption and love. It shows us that true wealth lies not in gleaming possessions or cavernous mansions, but in the tender chambers of the human heart, in its capacity for empathy, compassion, and connection. Alara, the virtuous sufferer, embodied a quiet dignity that shone brighter than any diamond, and Julian, the hidden savior, discovered that his greatest power was not his fortune but his ability to heal and be healed through love. Their journey from shared grief to shared joy teaches us that even when life's storms are pounding relentlessly, a hand reached out in kindness can be the umbrella that shelters a fragile soul, and a heart opened in vulnerability can find its truest home. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the unspoken magic that happens when one human being truly sees another, then please carry its message with you. Look for the Alaras in your world, those whose quiet suffering often goes unnoticed. Be the Julian who offers not just material aid, but the far more precious gifts of dignity, respect, and unwavering support. Remember that a simple gesture, a kind word, a moment of shared humanity can indeed be a miracle. We invite you to like this video, share it with those who need a touch of inspiration, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring narratives that celebrate the enduring power of the human spirit and the heartwarming beauty of love in all its forms. We believe in stories that uplift, inspire, and remind us of the good that exists in the world waiting to be awakened. We'll see you in the next one.